So Eric, how you doing?
I'm good, man. How are you? This was
I'm awesome.
this is the second time we've recorded this episode, just so everybody has some backstory here.
They're gonna know how much we care about this topic, and it's one of your favorites, budgets. We've gotten a number of inquiries about sharing some more details on our budget, and the fact that we've had these recent conversations about withdrawal rate really I think makes it an ideal time to dig in a little bit more and discuss how we do or don't budget.
So I'm so excited to talk about budgets, man.
You really are.
I do remember you telling me about 18 months before you stepped away from the workplace and stepped into RE that you were doing a pretty granular budget. And I'm actually suddenly starting to see the wisdom of that. Now I'm probably more than 18 months out on my fire date, but at the beginning of this year, it was supposed to be exactly 18 months. As I look back, the last time I really did a budget was kind of big life pivot point for me when I started the business 10 years ago. And that kind of set the course for me. And so I can see the value here. It's not something I check in day to day, but you have a framework for this and you had a very detailed budget before you stepped into RE. So why don't you set up how you and I created these budgets, which we're going to share with everybody?
Yeah, absolutely. And I, for one, would like to give you credit for really starting to dig into the budgets a little more. No one finds this exciting, or at least very few people, myself included, by the way. I don't think it's exciting.
I thought you liked it.
But I find it helpful. That's where the nice comes in. But, we also wanted to make sure that this was relatable, and everyone's circumstances are different. And so, like we've done in the past, we thought about defining a model portfolio of $2 million, a withdrawal rate of about 3% or $60,000 a year. And that would give us $5,000 a month to work with as a budget. And so what you and I did was basically scale our actual budgets. We went through and captured everything and scaled them to this withdrawal rate, this $5,000 a month, $60,000 a year, and used the same categories to make it much easier to compare side to side. Because as it turns out, a lot of people think about and categorize these things differently. So I think that was a really great suggestion you had. So maybe just briefly, what are those four big categories? So the first, fixed expenses. These are those boring must-haves. We all have to deal with commitments, ones that are, static or they really don't change a lot, mortgages, utilities, insurance, things like that. Variable expenses. I think for both of us, we decided this was really kind of like shopping. These things move around a lot, but you always got to buy groceries, home goods, buy new clothes, etc. The third category, something you and I have talked about a lot on Two Sides of Fi, is sinking funds. These are the, money we put aside and build up over time for irregular, but, definitely eventual expenses. Some of these are awesome things like vacation. Some of these are necessary, like medical expenses out of pocket, pets, taking care of your cars, maybe even future car purchases, back to the positive side. But, setting aside money for that. And lastly, things that are wholly discretionary, right? Those things we would never want to cut, but they're the easiest to cut in, when times are tough. This is fun stuff like, dining out at restaurants, entertainment, alcohol, bars, any kind of fun stuff. So that's where we started. And hopefully that makes sense to people.
Are these categories correlated with your original budget, or is this just a much more sort of streamlined categorization?
They actually are very similar. I used to have, even at a high level, a little bit more granularity, things that were kind of scheduled payments I had lined up a certain way. And I think a lot of that, honestly, Eric, had to do with just the fact that I was using You Need a Budget software, YNAB, many people call it. And that was sort of kind of built into how people tend to use that tool to think about it that way. These days, I collapsed it, at some prodding by you, to be totally honest, into a little more streamlined set of categories. And then for each of these top level, classifications, there's essentially, a number of, more granular line items as well.
Okay. So I think it'd be helpful just to look at each one of the categories and say, okay, do some comparative analysis here. So if we think about the different categories, fixed expenses, percentage wise in the budget, where do you sit here for your fixed expenses?
Yeah. So this will be one of our biggest differences, right?
Right.
I chose to hold a mortgage post RE. And so that means my fixed expenses are really 34% of my entire monthly spend, or on a $5,000 budget, about $1,700.
Okay, great. So yeah, comparatively, mine are 31%, 1,550 as part of a $5,000 a month budget. And I think the differences here, are obviously I don't have a mortgage, but I think my medical premiums are accounted for a little bit differently. I have a larger family. And this is one area where, as I started digging into the budget, I really learned a lot about what my future expenses are going to be in RE. And I should say, if you are listening on the podcast, go to the YouTube channel, hit that like and subscribe button. And also you'll get to see all of this on the screen. This is maybe a little bit hard to listen to. We're going to make these budgets available so you can see the sort of differences between the two and maybe use it to structure your own. We'll also have these posted in the show notes on twosidesoffi.com, so you can look for all of that there. As we drill into the exact category. So in this category, I have I have medical premiums, I have kind of utilities, I have insurance, taxes, and then there's a college line item, which I realize is probably another point of difference between you and I.
When we were talking before this episode, it was pretty clear that these healthcare premiums were one of the biggest areas of uncertainty for you, which is not surprising at all because clearly it's where a lot of people struggle. I sure know I did. But when I think about you, you've got added complexity because you've got various income streams, passive and otherwise, that may continue for some period of time. So how are you thinking about that in the context of your budget?
Yeah, I quickly realized, Jay, going on the Maine's ACA exchange, they have a website, just go on there, plug in your information for your size family, and then you start looking at different plans and what the premiums are, and also, like what the coverages are and all these. It's very complicated, right? And there's the costs add up very, very quickly. And so I just did a couple of different assumptions here, and I'm really trying to conservatively plan out like, okay, well, maybe it could cost up to this much. And so this is really, it's actually in red in my budget because it's just kind of a placeholder. I don't really know what this is going to be. So if the business continues to earn out, I'm going to treat this as a business expense. Laura and I are going to be working together, and we'll pay for it through the business. It's accounted for in here as a placeholder. That's all I can say for now. Does that make sense?
It makes good sense. And, I like the idea, and I did this in my first budgets as well, of saying, here's kind of worst case. And we even talked about this in our much earlier episode about healthcare, and we can link that in the show notes, where I was, planning for no subsidy at all, just not knowing what my income was going to look like, if I was going to do occasional consulting. And so I did what I called worst case modeling, was this level of healthcare with no subsidy whatsoever. And that has not proven to be the case. But, I certainly feel better that I went big in my budgets to make sure that I wasn't surprised in the bad way.
It just highlights how managing income in retirement is, it's a tricky calculus here. If you're trying to qualify for a subsidy, or you don't care about that, or you're trying to meet a low end income so that you're not on Medicaid, right?
Right.
It becomes complex very quickly. And I think it's great to have this kind of framework so that you can start moving the chess pieces around and look at what these different figures would mean to your overall budget. Cause I guarantee it's going to be a big part of it.
Yeah, absolutely. It's certainly in our budgets one of the most important things to consider. I think when I look at my budget, fixed expenses, barring the mortgage that I already mentioned, and that's my all-in cost with insurance and property taxes as well. Everything else is pretty straightforward. It's things we all have: utilities, car insurance, etc. This category doesn't really change for me.
Yeah, no, I'm in the same way. I where I do see it changing is in the insurance right now. I have 2 teenage boys, and our insurance here in Maine went up 40% this year.
Oh, wow.
Combined with an accident for one of them, unfortunately. So I do see that one changing a little bit. And then I also did have a college line item in here, Jay, and I have that in there for a fixed period of time because we're going to be paying for college out of pocket. Sort of for the first couple of years. And so I just wanted to account for that. And that's a significant line item in there.
Yeah, it's a good point. I haven't put a line item in here for college. I mean, we're relying on the 529 funding being sufficient based on the types of schools that our teen is now targeting. If that proves to be wrong, my budget's going to have to change because it's not set up for that right now.
Yeah. I mean, I think all of this is just about knowing the situation and making some baseline plan for it. And you guys planned for 529s way in advance of us. We got started way late just because we never thought we could ever be able to afford it. And so now we're having to kind of scramble a little bit on the back end, and seeing that the 529s are, they took a hit like everyone else's did. And,
Sure.
during COVID and this sort of recent recession here. And, it makes more sense probably just to fund it out of the budget spend, rather than cashing in the 529s, just save those till the end of the college years. So I think this is just a temporary plan, but it does kind of mean, I guess, it's another chess piece to move into another category at some future point. So do we want to talk about our variable expenses? How do you think about those?
Yeah, that's a good next step. As I mentioned, I really think about these as just shopping, and these
Yep.
normal expenses. They move around different vendors and types of expenses based on what we're doing, but they're always there and they're always important. And this is an example of an area that I used to track at a pretty granular level because I was interested in the idea of where the different money is going, groceries versus other expenses. It has stayed fairly consistent. It's around 22% of my budget right now, or about $1,100 in this model. But when I simplified my budget, I really took away a lot of that tracking. And so that's why there's no breakdown in my budget on this, because while I track it closely at a top level, I don't really drill down. But this is largely about groceries, clothes shopping, home goods, things like that.
Yeah, cool. Hey, we're at the same exact percentage, man. 22%, 1,100 of the 5,000 goes to variable expenses. So maybe my grocery bill is higher than yours, but I'm not shopping at Target as much.
Yeah, that's probably right. I think the Target and Amazon bills that somebody in this household incurs might be higher than yours. No comment.
It all evens out. Yeah, it's funny when you gave me a hassle about my grocery spend
A little bit,
and it's something I'm paying attention to. It's man. It's higher than I want it to be, but it's funny, when my son went off to college last fall, I got to see the grocery bill just kind of tank way down, because we spend everything on our credit card. So at the end of the year, the way that we look at these expenses, and it's some moderate level of tracking, but we can group it all and we can see, okay, this is where the money's going, and you can map it out month by month. I don't know if that's how you're tracking these variable expenses, or if you just have do you have a different means of doing that? Or is it all?
Yeah, I actually love that method, and I definitely used it years ago. And for people who are afraid of budgeting or have never done it before, I think it's an awesome place to start, especially if you're using like one credit card,
Yes.
your rewards card or whatever, because they do a lot of the hard work for you, and then you can, start there, and it's a good kind of baseline. I still use You Need a Budget, YNAB, the budget program I use. I'll link to it in the show notes, but I can just search by vendor. And there's a couple of heavy hitters in there, like, our grocery store, Target, Amazon. And that gives me a really good kind of cut of the top expenses. And of course, there's a long tail from there. But I do look at them and see how they trend over the year. That gives us something to think about. If we see something trending up and we're not really sure why, it's really quick to go in there and look at it. But it's not something we spend a lot of energy on at our house, as long as we are kind of staying within limits.
Yeah, totally. And it's actually just a real accounting of what you're spending. As long as, there's very few spends of ours that don't go on the credit card. And so looking back at that, you know how you can say, well, we spend roughly X dollars a month, but the reality is, like, some months are just, you got to buy a set of 4 tires for the car, or what, something, you got to replace your washing machine or something like that. And I don't know where this starts to interface and overlap with sinking funds, but maybe that's not a bad transition point, because I think you think about sinking funds a little bit different than I do. You want to just kind of paint the broad brush of what sinking funds are to you?
Sure. And I'm interested in this section because I want to know if any of the changes I've made over the last year have brought us closer together or farther apart in how we think about these. For me, I think about this is making sure we have enough money to fund these things that come at times during the year, or maybe even down the road longer term, but we don't want to be surprised when they pop up. We want to make sure we have money. We don't have to, draw down more than we were planning. I like to keep that pretty regular myself for anything but enormous expenses, right? That you can't even plan for. So things like vacation, making sure that we're putting enough money aside, if you will, every month into this bucket, so that when trips come up, we're ready to have, the money is there. It's part of my cash allocation effectively.
Okay.
And I can fund them.
Yeah.
And so some of these are a little more defined than others, right? Like medical out of pocket. This is one I want to talk about for sure, because I know that we've had discussions about this and we do differ. It's about looking at what I've spent out of pocket in medical for the last few years and just deciding, well, this is an average. Maybe I will put this much aside every month to make sure when those medical bills come, we're just ready to pay them, barring any big surprise expenses. How do you think about them? Is that different?
Well, I wanted to ask you, so first of all, the overall category represents what percentage of your budget?
Oh, yeah, absolutely. So it's exactly the same as variable expenses. For me, it's 22% or about $1,100 in this mock budget.
Okay, so it's lower than mine. Mine's at 34%. Mine's at 1,700 out of 5,000. So how I think about this is evolving, I would say, because, and I'll say the initial take that I had on this, especially with respect to medical costs here, was, if I look at a maximum out of pocket for a family, twice what the individual out of pocket maximum is. Let's just say it's around $14,000, $15,000 a year. Okay. And it's going to vary with whatever plan you have, but do you take that and then just subdivide that into 12 little chunks, and that's your monthly sinking fund?
Yeah. The most conservative way would be to do that.
Right. But then, you encouraged me to think, well, are you going to have bad year after bad year after bad year? And maybe, so yeah, the most conservative plan would plan for that. But also, what if you leverage an HSA? Isn't an HSA supposed to backstop that in some ways? So you could fully fund it in the first year. Well, I don't know how much you can put in HSA per year, 7,500?
Actually, I forget what this year's number is. I think that might be right. I already did my funding, and I know it's over 7,200, which was last year's, I think.
Yeah. So, at a certain point, you're going to be able to cover that expense, even in an emergency, right? But, as you have, marched now through a couple of years of retirement, you have a better idea of what your actual spend is. And then you also have a contingency for covering some more catastrophic event where you're going to be reaching a maximum out of pocket in the family. So could you just talk about that? Because my first budget was like, okay, take that maximum out of pocket, divide by 12. And it made it huge. And so I've since reduced that to, quite a bit less. It's 9% of the total.
Yeah, sure. I guess at the end of the day, I view this as a balancing act between worst case scenarios and knowing that with a 2-year cash allocation, even if I absolutely didn't want to touch my portfolio, i.e. sell things for, to when emergencies come up, I've got cash cushion there to work with. And so I've decided for the time being, I just literally look at the average of the last 3 or 4 years. Where have we come in on average, and then divide that by 12. And that's what comes out every month, knowing that some months I won't spend anything like that. Some months I will spend over it. I will say in the last 3 years now since RE, I've only had one expense for healthcare where I needed to pull out extra money specifically because I was underfunded on my out-of-pocket medical, and that was for a dental implant. And so I did take extra money out of my cash allocation. So that will be extra money I have to refill when it comes to my May, mid-year period when I do rebalancing. But I still feel fine about that because I wasn't just pulling more money out of the portfolio as I went. So I'm not saying that's like the right way, but it's definitely the way that Lori and I have decided works for us.
But is it just mental accounting essentially here?
I think so.
Because we can set all this money aside, and in my budget, 34% of it, that's a significant chunk, right? So I don't want to just park that in a high yield savings account necessarily, even though interest rates are decent right now. So it should maybe just sit as part of my cash allocation, is what you're saying you're doing, right?
If you're doing it in the way that I am. So for me, medical is 21% of my sinking funds, about 5% overall. And to me, that feels right. Maybe at this age, it's a little easier to not be super conservative, knowing that, well, maybe it's 1 in 6 or 7 years I hit my out-of-pocket max based on our past to date.
Sure.
Okay, I'm willing to accept that.
Yeah. Okay. That's cool. So, these other categories, we're talking maintenance, a new car, things like that. Like you may have things earmarked in here because you're going to replace a computer every 2 years or whatever that is. But, there is maybe some overlap with some of this variable spending, right? Like, you're not necessarily going to save up for a laptop in the fund, right?
I'll put myself on the spot here. When I first started, my budget, I did put stuff in there like that. I had a bigger car maintenance category because obviously you replace tires every so often,
Yeah.
and that's not inexpensive.
Right.
And you replace laptops every so often, and I had that stuff in there. But honestly, in the last year, I spent those down. I reallocated those funds, and they're not part of my budget anymore because I've decided that things that are big ticket guaranteed items in a given year, like vacation, that should be properly funded. I always, as Lori's told me, I don't ever want to have to think about, are we okay to do these things? Like traveling is one of the things we
Right.
really wanted to do in RE. But buying a laptop, if money's that tight, we're going to hold off on buying a new laptop. But
Totally.
in most cases, okay, we'll go into the cash allocation and we'll buy the laptop that we need. I mean, that's the kind of middle ground that we've come to. And honestly, I'm pretty comfortable with it. 3 years ago, I was not.
Is there a cutoff then?
We didn't set a dollar amount or anything like that. But it was
fine.
just kind of like what felt right to us.
Yeah. Yeah.
Maybe I should be modeling things like roof replacement and car, replacement, which is much less frequent than anything else we're talking about. Just pop those numbers into the safe withdrawal rate toolbox, right, from our earlier episode, and then just have that be in there as withdrawals that come at some frequency, and just model the overall withdrawal based on that instead of funding them explicitly here. I don't know if that's right or wrong, but I was thinking about that might be something I could do.
Yeah. I mean, it adds a margin of planning and safety to it. Probably it's more granular than this, but yeah, I don't know, man.
Yeah, I have no idea. I haven't done it. Obviously, I'm not following the Fritz plan, which I do like a lot. Fritz Gilbert, where he, puts, has these bigger buckets for these, large home repairs. And I think he's got one for vehicles, if I'm not mistaken. There's merit to that. I just haven't done it.
The deeper I get into this, though, I'm just like, I don't know if that's how I want to spend my time, man.
Nah,
I don't know if that's good value, but I do want to talk about the vacation category, man, because this is the largest percent in this category for me. It's 44%. It's 15% of my total spend. So where does it sit for you?
Total spend, we're almost the same, minus 14%.
Okay.
It's a larger percentage of my category, but it's also, I think, presently largely driven by the out-of-pocket medical sinking funds difference. So minus 63% of the category for vacation.
Yep. Okay. So 15% of the total. So we're pretty well aligned here, right? And I don't think even my budget, when I was first going through this and I was reviewing this with Laura, I was saying, okay, how's this feel to you? The real actual numbers that we're using. Yeah. And she's like, I don't know. The thing that this tells me is like, do we have enough allocated for our travel budget? And I know yours is adjusted up too. Did you have a similar discussion with Lori?
Yeah, we did. So, following our safe withdrawal episodes, I went back into the budget. I took your feedback to heart, as I generally do. I don't always discount it. No, I took it to heart. I really went in and looked at how much we spend, not playing this game of like, honestly, it seemed to me like I was just playing it way too safe, leaving more money in the portfolio versus just bringing it out into a sinking fund. I did the math on like the interest that I was gaining, in my money market at Fidelity versus my savings account that I hold sinking funds. And I'm like, well, this is just stupid. Right. So I properly funded vacation. And more importantly, I went in and looked year by year what we've been spending and had a conversation with Lori, and we agreed to increase the funding. And it was the right thing to do. And it feels really good now. Honestly, it was giving me hesitation that I was, explicitly underfunding this, knowing I was going to end up taking more money out anyway. So that was crazy mental accounting. I 100% agree. But I do worry, and I want to talk about this with you, that we're still planning for like today's vacations.
Yeah.
And what if in the future we have very different interests and needs, or we get into cruising or these other really expensive things? Like, does that keep you up at night? I don't know.
I mean, it's something that I'm starting to think about only because you're pointing it out, but I'll tell you where this really hit me when I started to look at some of the medical premiums and how they increase.
Yeah.
They do not increase in a linear fashion. It's very scary. The older you get, the curve goes way up. So
you're doing like the Medicare math and stuff and looking at those premiums?
It's really, I mean, I started looking at it because I was like, well, geez, how do I need to account for this adjusting over time? Does it just adjust with inflation? No, it does not adjust with inflation. So taking your inflation adjustment every year is not going to cover those medical ones, but speaking to the vacation piece, it's more reason to kind of buffer your your withdrawal a little bit, your withdrawal rate, because man, I don't know how to account for this, man. If I think about my college funds, those funds, they're going right into the travel budget because I just want to be able to do as much as I can. Especially when we're young, I mean, I don't know if you've read that book, Die with Zero, but it's making the rounds
it is making the rounds. It's on my list. I haven't read it, but the concept is something I'm thinking about a lot.
Yeah. And it's just, spending certain amounts of money at certain decades and times in your life when it makes the most sense, getting the highest dollar value out of your money at whatever age range you're in. I mean, we're not going to be climbing the Himalaya when we're in our 80s probably. So if you want to do that kind of thing, it makes sense to spend up front. And so I really want to find a way to be more intelligent about the spend in this category. If we're cruising, I see that kind of stuff happening maybe a little bit when we get a little bit older, and maybe by that point our portfolio is just on one of those Seafire Sim vertical curves, right?
To the moon.
Well, what do you think? Are you padding this at all?
Well, honestly, Eric, here's a fun conversation. You can't have it both ways. You've been pushing me to increase my withdrawal rate, which I did.
Yes.
But now I've taken away padding that makes me feel comfortable about exactly this kind of topic. So now I'm going to have to go in and go model Medicare premium increases.
It's still fail safe. You're still at the fail safe range, aren't you?
I know. But something I've pointed out before, and I know I'm not the only one doing this based on feedback we've gotten in the comments, underspending, under withdrawing, sometimes to ridiculous degrees. I agree, right? I've taken the feedback. It gives you sort of mental kind of safety nets, and it's, what I mean? That's still an adjustment for me. Yes, I have a safe withdrawal rate.
No, I get it.
It's not fail safe. It's not zero.
Oh, okay.
But it's very low.
Yeah. No,
theoretically.
The thing about
until it's not.
When I read a bunch of those comments, there was a lot of people who were sitting in your camp saying, "Hey, yeah, I feel this. I'm this kind of person."
Yeah.
And they basically were saying, "Wait, we just wait till Eric gets there. He's not going to spend the money."
Yeah, I saw that.
I'm fighting every step of the way, man. I'm going to spend it.
Yeah, I think you are. I think you are. And I'm learning from your example. It'll be fun the tables can't turn because I'm already there. You're just going to be the new one to it.
Right.
But I am very interested in seeing what happens in year one versus year two. Maybe you only have a shaky 3 months instead of first year or two. You'll just accelerate it. But I feel like most of us go on this journey.
I'm sure it'll happen, man. I feel a little bit insulated because of the business.
That's got to help.
That's the thing, right? Once you turn the faucet of the paycheck off, that's scary. I can feel that. It's a different place.
A little weird.
Yeah. All right. So vacation, looks like we can go on vacation together, man.
We can.
We're
going to do it. We got to make it happen. Everybody wants to see two sides of Fi on the road.
Oh man, it's going to happen soon.
All right. I'm up for it.
All right.
Let's talk about even more fun. Let's go into discretionary. I mean, discretionary is one of my favorites besides the vacation part of sinking funds. But it's basically equivalent to what I spend on variable expenses and sinking funds, 21%, also about $1,100 out of the $5,000 budget. How about you?
Mine's only 13%, man.
What the heck?
What's
the dollar amount on that?
I'm not having as much fun as you are.
No way, man. You got to do better.
$650 on this. Maybe I'm just spending all that money elsewhere.
Wait, you've been the one encouraging me to spend more, so I think we need to work on your budget a little bit. And maybe it's just you're right and I'm wrong here. I'm going to get stranded with medical expenses someday.
Well, I got freaked out about my medical, man. That's our big difference here.
I know. I used to be really freaked out about it too. But now I figure hey man, worst case, I spend up to the out-of-pocket maximum that year. It's not going to keep happening, probably. And if it does, I got to change the whole budget, and that's going to make sense. But yeah.
How should I bump up my spending here? I've got dining, alcohol, entertainment. That's at 9% of my total budget. I don't know. Does that need to go up anymore? What's yours?
So out of that 1,100, about 70% of it is dining out at restaurants.
All right,
all alcohol spending goes in here, whether it's for the home or out. Other entertainment, going to shows, theater. Yeah. I mean, things you care about too, at least the going to shows part. Dang. I mean, that's an important category for us. The other stuff, there's some subscriptions in there, like streaming services, whatever.
Yep.
That's much smaller, right? It's only 1% of total budget or 7% in the category. Honestly, there's a long tail of stuff that I put into here, kind of some fun money that each of us have in the budget every month, right? Can spend without question. few other things like that, that basically is the bulk of the remainder.
Yeah. Okay. Well, it sounds like I got some work to do here, man. But to be honest, I have so much concert travel planned this year. It's ridiculous. And
Yeah. Well,
so
that's good stuff.
maybe I just need to go back and recalculate. We bought tickets to see Duran Duran. Okay. This is not a show I'd ever thought I would.
Dude, they are so good live. I gotta tell you, you're going to be happy. They're very good live.
So
even now,
we bought it with friends of ours, you know,
love it.
At end of an evening, we're like, oh, we should go see these guys. And sure enough, they're touring, but you know, they're old enough where they realize the audience, what kind of cash the audience has. So it's stupid expensive, man. Like,
yeah, I mean, hey, I understand. We just spent a ton of money going to see Billy Joel and Stevie Nicks, to date myself even more than Duran Duran. And that's because my teenager is into the retro. So,
okay,
you know, yeah. I'm going to go see those two. So I did, and it was a lot of money. But hey, like you said, die with zero. We're making memories now and having a great time. And I know that's how you feel about shows.
Totally, man. Yeah, we're going.
Maybe you wouldn't pick Duran Duran first. You'd rather have Metallica. But hey, it's all good. You're going to see them too.
Yes, yeah. And we're also Lamb of God and Pantera. I've never seen Pantera before.
Oh, there you go. you got all bases covered. No Insane Clown Posse?
I'm seeing them maybe. Steel Pole Bathtub is on tour. Hey, you know what? Candlemass is on tour.
Indestructible Noise Command.
Dude, I think they self-destructible Noise Commanded.
I really hope somebody in our audience likes any of those acts, because it'll be amazing. Hey, I've got a question about your discretionary budget. Do you still have your cleaning service in here?
My cleaning service went in there, yeah.
Okay, so talk about that, because this is truly discretionary, but it must be important. You've left it in the budget.
Well, no, I had it under fixed in the first round of this budget, and you're like, dude, really? That's a fixed expense? Like, let's think about the discretionary category as being things you could possibly cut. And I'm thinking, oh, yeah, that's a good point. Because right now, when you're working, you don't have a lot of time, you know, we prioritize that pretty high, being able to have a clean house to come home to. Yeah. When we're retired, maybe not so important, right? Our two teenage mess hounds leave, you know, maybe we got to clean our house anyway. So I kind of cut it in half.
Okay.
So it's every other week. And I still kept it in there. But I mean, I think the point with all this discretionary stuff is like, times get tight, you can do a little cutting in this category. And it looks like you have more room to cut than I do.
Yeah, I do. And we set it up that way from the start. And if there's one category Lori's been a big advocate for, and in our last round of budget work, she put even more money in, it's this one.
Yeah, cool.
It's because she doesn't like the idea of having to think about this stuff. Yeah. I mean, like we talked about in the Safe Withdrawal Rate Part 2 episode, you know, she does not want to be in the situation where, you know, her or our kid are like, hey, let's go out to dinner tonight. And I'm like, ooh, budget's a little tight, guys. Not going to be doing that. I mean, like, why did we do this?
Right.
Like, why did we go on this path and make the sacrifices we did? If, you know, someone's like, well, let's spend $50 on like takeout Chinese food. And dad's like, I don't think so, kids, budget. Right.
That's funny. No, it's funny because I asked Laura, I said, are you feeling constrained by any spending right now? And, you know, there was a few things that came up. She's like, well, sometimes I feel a little guilty if I buy some extra clothes, you know, and
it's shoes, man. It's always shoes.
Oh yeah. It's shoes. Yeah, for sure.
It's shoes.
Yeah. Well, anyway. And then when you travel, you know, you got to have the travel outfits. And like, I don't get that. I don't have travel outfits.
I don't have travel outfits.
I got like this. That's it.
You are pretty consistent. Lest our audience be confused otherwise.
But I mean, you know, you got to make room for that stuff, right? She's telling me that's a constraint, just like Lori was telling you. We want to go out to eat more. You got to dial it up. And so like, I love having done this exercise because it's taught me some things. I'm learning from you on how you've set up your budget, which seems to be pretty smart in several of these categories. And, you know, this is another spot where I'm just going to revisit and say, okay, does this make sense? Like this is a spot where I actually should be bumping this up a little bit. It's nice comparing these kind of percentages, even though we've normalized this to that $2 million budget. And it's just nice to see kind of where you're filling the buckets here. Did anything change from your original pre-fi budget once you got into RE?
Yeah. I mean, so first of all, the absolute amounts have increased. They didn't increase at all for the first almost 2 years. I didn't take an inflationary adjustment in year 2 until we were pretty late in the year. And then this year, that amount went up again. So I'm up more than 20% overall. But that is largely about me releasing some of the constraints, partially in response to some of our recent conversations, partly in response to conversations I've had with Lori, and just, being a little more realistic about safe withdrawal. So that's the biggest change. I think other than that, it's been about the granularity of my budget, which is feedback, I rightfully took again from you, but also just I realized I wasn't benefiting from the level of granularity I was tracking. And I also understood my spending a lot better. So I realized I could collapse things. Not only has that been really effective and made it easier for me to budget, it also made it much easier for me to summarize for an exercise like this. So it makes it easier for me to talk to other people, you, Lori, anybody who I would be talking about my budget with. It makes it much easier to have that conversation. But the flip side, if I'm being honest, is in losing some of that granularity, I'm now a little more cognizant that any trend changes could be masked by just looking at top level. And so I don't mean that that's like created a whole bunch of new work for me, but it does sort of like, at least it's now in my head. Well, if I see anything change, maybe I should look at kind of by, vendor.
Don't you think that's good?
I think it is good.
I think I'm just going to step in here and say it's super healthy because, you're focused on the details, and I've been guilty of this in the past too. Like, grubbing about little tiny expenses. And then like you see the seed of discontent that's planted when you do that, right? It's like, your partner's looking at you like, really? Yeah. So no, I think that's a good positive change. So would you say that the inflation increase went to primarily two categories, vacation and dining out / entertainment?
Yeah, I would say so. I did increase our variable expenses a little bit.
Okay.
Some of that I think was just cost of groceries, for example, going up, and some home goods. And that's normal. That's something I, was probably tighter on last year than I should have been. And taking that adjustment definitely made that better.
Do you think there'll ever come a time when you don't hold a budget?
I love this question, honestly. And I'm pausing because I'm not sure the best way to answer it. Yes, I really do think it's going to get a lot softer. I don't know when I could get to the point that, Fritz Gilbert talks about, where it's like he funds his whole year and basically puts it in checking and just spends out of that. It doesn't sound like there's any budgeting or detailed kind of accounting that's happening, at least the way I understand him describe it.
He said 7 minutes a quarter.
Yeah, I don't know if I can get quite to that level. I love the idea, and I know Lori would be thrilled, because if she sees me out with the budget, I always wonder if she's like, oh, how much time are you spending on this? Do I think I will always be at this level? Honestly, I don't. I think I will get just that much more comfortable. Our spending will become more consistent. Maybe it's lumpier in the beginning, but I think it will, but I honestly can't tell you that I know when that is. So what about for you? So you've done this budgeting exercise. What do you think it's going to look like when you get started, post RE, and how quickly will that change, if at all?
I think we'll maintain this for a little while. I kind of think of the crossing the finish line of FI as this focusing point. So as we get closer to it, you got to have certain things in place. And then as you cross that threshold and you move further away from it, it probably goes more out of focus. That's kind of how I'm thinking of it. But a budget for me has never been more than setting a course direction. I am never going to get in this thing and like dial the numbers up and down to the $50 amount. I'm just like not going to do it. It's not a productive use of my time.
No.
So
that's
kind of how I see it. But it's nice having done the exercise, just because I know for you in the same way that, if something is looming out there as a potential trend curve in the wrong direction, like, spending's going off the rails. For me, having this budget here is a suggestion that I got it mostly figured out. There's not things I'm forgetting, unless you had looked at mine and said, oh, there's something missing here.
No, nothing at a high level. I think, the same challenges exist for all of us. And they're much more challenging the younger we are, not older like us.
Yeah.
And that, projecting future spending is difficult. I think about the biggest thing you and I have hit on, unsurprisingly, that is less known today is just, will our vacation desires and therefore spending change? And what will our medical expenses look like in the future? And we can't really know those. Doing some kind of back of the envelope modeling is probably really smart, and accounting for extra spend, as we've talked about, when doing our safe withdrawal rate mapping, is also probably really smart. but it's impossible to know what it will look like. And I think I'm okay with that uncertainty because I don't feel like it's all over the map. I feel like it's largely focused in a couple areas.
Yeah. And we're also not accounting for any expensive hobbies that you and I may adopt.
It's true.
Laura and I went down to visit the family in Florida, and we stopped by her aunt and uncle's place, and he has this radio controlled sailboat collection. And I'm like,
oh man.
Oh, and anytime I see anything radio controlled, I'm like, I gotta have it. I gotta have it.
Yeah, I remember that.
I'm like so sick about that stuff. Have you ever seen these remote control sailboats?
I have. They're really impressive.
So sick.
Yeah, and they're probably a lot easier to deal with than say model radio controlled airplanes, which I got into briefly because I love everything aviation. But thankfully, that's harder than I want to put the time into to get good at. So I'm just like, well, I'm okay. I want to get into those giant scale model rockets, the ones that you need like permits to like
quarter scale.
Yeah, I mean, they're just enormous.
That's dangerous, man.
I mean, is it? What if you're far away? It's not that dangerous. Come on, I'm a trained scientist. We can do this.
Yeah, right. It tips over and it's this giant firework heading into your neighborhood. Beware, anyone living near Jason. Jeez. Dude. What else was there? Oh yeah, model railroading, man. I'm definitely getting back into that.
I know you are.
That's a future hobby. That's not life energy best spent when in my 50s probably.
That's right. Yeah. When it's about the time that whittling starts to sound like a good use of time that I think model railroading really increases in desirability.
Stop it. One thing in my budget, Jay, that you flagged the last time you and I discussed this was if we're going to be living part of the time elsewhere, I need to account for that in some way in the fixed expense. And I was thinking maybe when that college expense goes away, that's kind of the placeholder for that.
Yeah, I totally agree. I think that's a really important thing to think about if that's something you're going to prioritize. And
I think so. Yeah.
Starting with any kind of starting point is something, right? You need a placeholder, put a little work into it. And if it becomes a priority, then it's worth putting a little more work into, right?
Make it real.
Yeah. I mean, an example, related but a little different that Lori and I were talking about recently is, we have this idea, and I know you're interested in it too, of, spending months abroad, for example.
Yes.
And maybe doing that, a few times a year, perhaps, while maintaining, a permanent residence too. And so I did the math of like, well, what would that look like if we're not in our home? What expenses are no longer needed, what stay with the house, certain basal utilities and taxes, et cetera. And then I just said, well, all that, normal shopping we do and food shopping and blah, 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 all those things just becomes now part of our budget for living somewhere else. And that actually gave us some clarity on, what could we spend over that period of time? And even just the little bit of time it took, I mean, maybe a half an hour thinking about it was a great starting point for conversation about, okay, well, what could that actually look like? Where could we go on that kind of budget? And would we need to make other trade-offs if we wanted to do something a little more elaborate? So I don't know if you and Laura have thought about that yet, but having the real data in the budget for me made that so much easier.
Yeah, I mean, we're definitely considering that as a life plan, as you and I have both talked about. But I haven't put a lot of bounds on it yet, man. But it's nice having that variable spend's going to track with you, right? That's
exactly.
It's nice having that category. But are you going to rent the home?
Don't know. Okay. I mean, obviously that would change the calculus completely.
Yeah, right.
If we were doing home exchange or something like that. I mean,
that's the funny thing. A lot
of options
in here is like your home is this asset, right? And you can either let it just be passive, or you can turn it into something. And I mean, it's definitely something to consider. I mean, we made the choice to pay our home off because for us that provides a level of padding to all of these numbers and a level of comfort that we didn't have before doing that. And I'm so happy that we did it, even though it's not the most financially optimized decision. It made so much room and headspace for us to be able to make the moves we're making now. So I know it's not the right choice for everybody, but yeah, it's nice to think about that as another chess piece here.
Absolutely. No, it's an excellent point.
All right, I'm just going to wad this budget up and throw it in the trash now.
Throw it out, man. No, I would save it. You don't have to revisit it anytime soon, but you put the work into it. Don't delete it.
Yeah.
Or give it to Laura. She'll hold on.
Are we actually going to upload these things for people to see, or does nobody care?
I don't know if they care, but I think we should definitely put them in the show notes, and maybe you'll flash them up at key points in the episode. And yeah, I think, honestly, Eric, obviously everyone's life and their priorities are different, and costs are different everywhere. And the way people think about priorities is different. So my thought about making the budgets available, at least people can see a framework. This is maybe something they could take as a starting point if they're not already budgeting. If they are budgeting and just want to see, on a relative percentage basis, how we're thinking about these expenses, maybe there's utility in that. So yeah, let's make them available.
And if the percentages change between when we talked about this and what you see online, too bad.
No, we're sorry, is what Eric means to say. Life is fluid, as are the numbers.
We've been known to lie about our numbers before.
I don't know about lie. I think maybe misrepresent that we were going to share them. That's true.
Clickbait.
Been accused of that a few times.
All right. Should we share our numbers now? I mean, for everyone who waited till the end of this episode, we're just going to give you a great surprise. All right. This is just for our members. Members only conversation.
Members only conversation. The actual numbers. You were starting.
Oh, really? I thought you were. Jesus Christ. It could be your fucking day.